Welcome to a new episode of the Global Telescope. I am joined today by Naomi. Naomi is the Europe correspondent for the Irish Times, and she's one of the hosts of the Irish Passport podcast. Now, before we begin, um, I'll tell you a little thing about the Irish Passport podcast. If you go to the link in the description, you will see that the last main episode features me. And that is because Naomi here was gracious enough to talk to me and let me be a part of an episode on India and Ireland. And it's a fascinating episode um, that explores the colonial history, the parallels, um, and the stories range everything from how former Indian president called himself an Irish after he was an Indian, and how a vegetarian cafe was used during the Irish uh, uh, war as an arms depot during the rebels' struggle. Um, and so, if I'm not wrong, that particular part, the vegetarian cafe, got a lot of traction on Twitter. I thought a lot of people loved it. And so, if you want to know more about it, visit the link in the description. If you want to see the full interview that I had with Naomi, you can do that by becoming a Patreon supporter of the Irish Passport. And it's something that I would say is worth doing because the podcast, one of my personal favorites, covers everything from historical to contemporary, from society and culture to political. And so it's a fascinating insight into Irish life. Uh, to begin the episode, I'll ask Naomi to tell us what she does, how she became a Europe correspondent for the Irish Times, and with that context, explain a little bit about the general overview between the relationship between Ireland and the European Union.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Vic Grant, and for giving our podcast a shout out. It was really brilliant to have you on and fascinating topic. I agree. Um, yeah, my name is Naomi O'Leary. I'm the Europe correspondent for the Irish Times, which means day to day I cover European affairs. It's quite a broad brief, obviously. There's a lot going on in Europe. Um, a lot of the time it's covering the European institutions, things like the European Commission, European Parliament, general and current affairs. Brexit has been a big theme for us. It's becoming less so, obviously, after over the past 2 years now, or certainly a year and a half. It's been all COVID-19, so a lot of sort of investigating what's going on in different European countries. Are they taking different approaches to the virus? How can we compare that kind of thing? But it's a very broad brief, and it really can be anything. So from news about cyber attacks to natural disasters like the flooding that we saw in Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands recently. Um, and then, of course, there's sort of Irish, because it's an Irish newspaper, there's special Irish angles on things that are of, particular Irish interest, whether it's stories about the significant Irish figures who work in Brussels, or um, other angles that are sort of have a special Irish interest. So that's my day job, I suppose. And then I also make the Irish Passport podcast with my co-host Tim McInerney, who's a lecturer at a Paris university. We started doing that. So I've worked for the Irish Times for come about a year and a half now. Um, Before that, I've basically been a foreign correspondent for different news organizations. So I worked for Reuters, and I was a graduate trainee with Reuters. That was where I trained as a journalist, and I worked for them in London and in Rome.
Mhm.
Then I worked for Agence France Presse, the French news agency in London, but also covering Irish affairs for them, but for an international audience.
Mhm.
Then I worked for Politico, the US news organization, but for its European branch, which is based in Brussels. And for them, I was writing about Ireland, also about the Netherlands, sometimes Denmark, sometimes Italy. So that was my experience before coming Europe correspondent for the Irish Times. And the podcast began I'm gonna say 2017, I think it was. Myself and Tim felt there was an urgency to try to explain Irish current affairs and history, and those two things together, because we felt that you can't understand the current day without understanding the backstory that led up to it. And it was very informed by the situation of Brexit. The United Kingdom leaving the European Union posed a massive challenge to Ireland because of the border that's across the island between the Republic and Northern Ireland, the two jurisdictions, one of which is part of the UK and one of which is the independent Republic. So this was a very challenging time for the Irish state, and myself and Tim felt that there was a low level of knowledge about Irish history and also the current day reality. There wasn't a very high level of knowledge about why that border mattered, what was the problem with it. So we decided to do this podcast, essentially filling in all of that backstory. How did this come to be, and answering those questions, essentially tying together current affairs and history.